Welcome to this webcast from Thorogood about Anaplan's new user experience, or UX as they like to call it. It's our very first look at this new piece of functionality, and we're calling it that because it's a product that's not actually been released yet. Nevertheless, though, there is lots to look at. So I'm Howard Yates. I've been working with Anaplan for around 5 years now, and I am what they term a solution architect, and I've had considerable experience on a variety of different projects with it. What we're going to cover today looks like this. I'm just going to introduce where we're at with the product right now, and then we're going to dive into the key components of it, being the worksheet, the board, and the charts. And we'll include demonstrations all along the way in this webcast. So having done that, we're going to look at some further demonstrations, pulling out some comparisons between the new user experience and the standard user interface, looking at some dashboard examples in both environments, some other observations, and then have a little look at what we might expect down the road, what we know is coming for the product before wrapping up and concluding. So when Anaplan talk about the new user experience, this is what they lead with. It's the idea that it's going to be very visually engaging, very intuitive and pleasurable to work with, easy. And why do they want that? They want it to really drive the usership, bring more people into the process that Anaplan is going to be supporting. So their terminology, they're democratizing decision making. So also providing this kind of veneer onto complex applications, which is business friendly and usable for the end users. Great news is that this new application is compatible with all existing Anaplan applications, so it just simply sits on a separate server and points to all the objects that are there already, and there's full compatibility. But where we're at now is something they call early access. So it might be just terminology for being in beta, but we've got all access to everything that there is right now, and Anaplan are gathering feedback on it, and there's an expectation, I think that's going to be released sometime this year, and it's gone into the early access around 12th of June, so we're just about coming up to the 3-month mark with it. So let's have a look at the components. At the very highest level, we have an app, which is essentially a collection of pages, being the boards or the worksheets. Now, the worksheet, shown on the right-hand side there, is going to be a big grid, which you can either use for analysis or data entry. And with the worksheet, there are some specific analysis features, which we'll look at more closely shortly. And also, there's an insights panel, which isn't shown on this screenshot, but we'll look at that too. So that's different from a board. So a board is much more like a conventional dashboard, being a canvas that you can throw lots of different objects on in much the same way that you can with the standard interface right now. And those objects will work together. So you make selections by clicking on rows and columns, and things will all move together to align. Now, the objects that we've got there, grids, charts, of course. We've got some KPI cards, text images, action selectors. So quite a few things going on, and we'll have a look at those in a second. Now, it struck me when I was looking at the difference between the boards and the worksheets, and really getting to the bottom of when you would use what when, is that you could create a board that looked just like a worksheet, and that's what I've done here. And as you can see, they look very, very similar. So what is the difference? Well, there are some notable differences I've just highlighted here that really speak to the comments earlier about the analysis and the insight. So the insight panel is a little panel that you can pull out. It's normally hidden. You can pull out when you need it. It's essentially a little dashboard that sits on the right-hand side there. So it's the one with the graph and the grid. And it's also got a little area for links up the top. So it's so that you're not just operating in complete isolation with the grid that you're looking at. So let's have a look at those things in the application. So this is where you get to with the new user experience, the very highest level. So you just select the apps, option there, and these are a list of all my apps. I happen to have built an app called the Syndicate Business Forecast. This is just based on an existing accelerator application that we happen to have. So I just go into that, and you will see a number of links to different pages. There's a bit of organization to this. There's some categories that schedule out the reports into the different areas. And what we're going to do first is have a look at creating a page. So at the top here, I'm going to create a page, and it asks me, do I want to do a board or a worksheet? So I'm going to go with a board. That's the one that's highlighted. It asks me to choose a workspace. It asks me to choose a model or application that I'm going to work with. And then which category do I want to put it into? Straight away, I've got my canvas up for my board, and I can see all those objects I referred to earlier that I can throw onto my board. So I'm going to pick a grid to start off with, and you'll notice as soon as you throw any object in, it fills the full width. So this is the general paradigm that is the new user experience, which actually works very well. So it's a bit like justification when you're writing text in a Word document, where it goes both left and right, so you get a nice alignment with both edges. So then I need to configure this grid. So all these objects are coming out of the model application that I selected. So I will choose, I think it's that one. Throw that on, and you can see that fills the width again, so it looks slightly odd just at the moment. So I'll just agree with that. I've got options to allow it to be editable, change the title, etc. And up it goes. And then I'll throw a chart by the side of that. So again, go into my library, find a chart. So it gives you a quick preview of the data underneath the chart. Then it tends to default to a combination chart, but I've got a number of different charts that I can reference, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail shortly. So there I have my column chart. Stick with the standard clustering and add it. Now, I want to adjust the size of that, so I'm going to pull this down a little bit so I can see my columns a bit more clearly, and then I can also drag along. Now I've got 12 background columns here which the objects need to fit to. So if I just drop it over here, so the two cards that I've got will snap to those columns, and then we're good with those. Maybe just go up a little bit so I'm at the bottom of my grid a bit better. Then let's throw something else on. Let's go with a KPI. So I can pull a KPI down here. So all KPI really is a single cell from a report. So it wants me to pick something, and then it'll show it as a single number. And then there's this number scale that we can operate with. So I can have that in just millions if I want. So that's popped in there. And then let's have some actions. So these are the processes that we've already seen in the standard application, and they can be referenced here and actioned by the user. So not all of the actions are available, because some of those actions could be to open a dashboard in the old system. So it's just things like the exports and imports. So I've got some processes here that I'm just going to switch on, and they automatically creates the buttons for me, and they're nicely laid out. So I'll add them there, and then again I can just go and align a bit, make it a bit tidy. Now this view here isn't quite how you would see it when it renders, because we've got these gray areas. But so you sometimes have to go backwards and forward a little bit to get it just how you want, but it's not too much of a problem. And then lastly, we just need to publish it. So there is my finished dashboard, all very quick and easy. and I can click on different things. I don't think this particular dashboard is going to synchronize. I think they're just showing the same things. But what it will do is highlight these selectors at the top. So these get highlighted depending on what you're hovering over. So this chart has got 2 years on it. So it is not allowing me to change this year selector because it's not applicable, but it will highlight the others. And similarly, when I'm hovering over the grid, it is not allowing me to change the premium tab, but it will allow me to change the others. So a bit of context specific, but it keeps it all very nice and tidy and minimizes the need to have lots of different selectors over each of the individual cards. So that's a dashboard. So let's have a look at the worksheet. So I showed you earlier the one called gross losses. So if I go into gross losses, it's already come up with my little insight panel. Now that insight panel can be brought out with this little connector. Go to the very top level to get all the data. It's very similar now. So when the panel comes out, I can show you the board equivalent of that report. You see it looks very similar, just missing these subtle icons. Now on this one, I've actually got the line item first row column not properly aligned, and I've done that just to really point out that one of the differences is that that gets defined by the view associated with this grid back in the conventional application where you would build your application. But when you're with the worksheet, these columns can actually be dragged about, which means that creating them is just that bit quicker. So this is editing that worksheet, and when I'm at the top there, I've got this ability to just drag the columns in a much more simple way. There's no faffing around with estimating numbers of pixels and so forth. So that's nice. So what else have we got in the worksheet version of this grid? Well, let's start in the top left here. I've got this find option, and I can type in a word, and it will go and search in all the metadata, i.e. the rows, the columns, and also the pages, to see where that exists. So it's come up with all the different classes in this particular instance that have got the word binder in it, and I can just go and select, and it will reduce it down. That's quite nice. It will also work with the pages, so I know that I've got a 2019 version of data. So if I get rid of that, type in 2019, it spots that, I can select it, and then it will actually go and change the view to fall in line with it. I go back. Find. Obviously that's going to come into its own once you start getting really large grids, which is entirely possible. We've got a feature over here that you see in the old application about cell history. So if you highlight different cells and click on that, you've got an option of different time periods over which those cells may have changed. So conventional functionality brought through there. Go back to the top. We've got a filtering system. I can highlight a column and then filter that column. So I've got a number of different conditions. So it's like standard one, the greater than, less than, etc. So I can do greater than and then say 1,000,000. And then my column will be filtered accordingly. That filter, and I've got a sort function. So again, I can select a particular column, sort it, and then because it's got a hierarchical structure in the rows, it won't actually sort it right across the whole piece. It will stay within the structure. So it's only the children of cargo that will be filtered. Probably best a little bit. There we can see under casualty treaty that we've got an ascending series of values. Here we've got an option to add a new class of business, which is what's in my rows. So similarly, if it was a new product, new location, you can set that up. So you click on it and it launches a form which I've pre-built and associated with this worksheet. So I can type in the name, find the parent, and then if I've got a particular property attribute associated with that element, then it will let me add that in with the new element and put it into the new hierarchy. And then lastly, I can run processes. So this is one of the processes that I pulled onto that example board earlier, so I can run a process from here too. So that is the worksheet, plenty of functionality for working with a large data set. So let's just pop slides and have a look at the charting functionality and what's happened there. So what I've done in this grid is just pull together what charts we have already in the standard interface and what now comes through with the new user experience. So there's a lot of commonality, but there are clearly some gaps. So if we pick out funnel, map, and timeline, I think those of you who are familiar with those chart types, they are amongst the more specialist of the chart types. So we don't have them yet in the new UX. That may change. But I do know that waterfall has not been made available in the user experience, and certainly my experience of using Anaplan, the waterfall is one of the great charts that is very popular, very powerful. So it's a shame that's not appeared there. Hopefully that will come through as well shortly. What is new though is what they refer to as the dot and the area chart. Now the dot chart in fact is available to a certain extent in the standard version. It comes through on a combination chart as an option to show data, but in the new user experience, it's a full-fledged chart as well as being an option on a combination chart, and we've also got area as well. The standard stacking and percentage features are there as well, so that's good. So let's have a look at some other changes which are actually quite significant, but perhaps a little bit more subtle, and that's in the way that you set up the chart. First off, you can change the chart type without having to completely recreate it. So it works off a view in a very similar fashion as before, but if you decide that you want a different look, you can simply go in and change the chart type in this little box on the right-hand side here. It's just simply a selection. Further, when it comes to the actual rendering of the data, there are more choices and a bit more controllability and flexibility in how you do it. So these are my line items that are being rendered on the chart. I can choose specific colors to associate with those elements, and I've got a larger palette to choose from. So I can maintain consistency from cycle to cycle on what colors we render with against, say, certain customers or whatever it happens to be, and then I can choose a particular chart type and then which axis that's going to run off, all very individually. So that's nice to have. Now with the new chart types, the dot and the area, you can see that in certain presentations of it, they're essentially the same as the line charts, very similar shape. But I think you would use these charts in different contexts. So the area chart looks much better as a stack chart, where you can see the proportions changing over time, and that works quite nicely. And then the dot chart works very well when you've got a very messy combination chart. Now, what I've done here, this is a chart we'll see shortly, is use the dots to capture the maximum loss ratio, which has been rendered on the right-hand side. Now, I've done this so that when I flip between different classes and different currencies and so forth, that there is some consistency between them. So when I know that the lines are high up, I know that that is, higher than perhaps one that is genuinely low. And what we don't get is a rebasing of the graph that gives a sort of distorted effect. Now in Excel you can fix the axes to be at certain levels, but there is no explicit fixing of the axes at the moment in Anaplan, and that includes the new user experience. So that's just a way around it. So let's go on to our second demonstration and make a comparison between some dashboards that have already been built in the old interface, the standard interface, and see how they render in the new user interface. So I have a little dashboard here to take me to the first grid. So this is part of an accelerator application that we have. It's designed to capture lots of different data elements from a series of end users. So it's quite complicated, lots of little grids, little bits of text, etc. And ends up looking a bit like this. I'm just going to navigate to one of the actions just to show you that, that there is the difference in colors, and then we've got this comments at the bottom to support the form. Now in our new user interface, I'm going to go back and I'm just going to show another little custom demo menu that I've built just to illustrate what else you can do. So I have got 4 options to take me to these reports that I've rendered in equivalence for the new user experience, and I'm just throwing on an image to show that you can do that. For this first series of grids, I thought it was actually better to break it up because there's quite a lot in that report, and it looks slightly better as a separate page, one where you could actually enter the information, and then another one where you could calculate the answers. So we're still getting the blue, which is indicating where you can enter numbers coming through. So more blue cells, etc. So this is a very handy little back button to take me to back to that menu. And then we've got a section showing the actual calculation. This is a sort of the output of that form up there. And then I've got my comments at the bottom. Now comments seem to be dealt with in a slightly different way with the new user experience. So on the plus side, because new user interface fills the full width of your page with the grid, it means that you can get an awful lot wider columns if you want to show comments within a grid. So this is just what I've done to show how your comments change between different versions. So there's more to show there. In the old interface, you were limited to about 350 wide for a column. But if you wanted to show as much as you can and just create a cell that was fully as wide as the page, then it looks like this. But that's noticeably different from the standard interface, because in a standard interface you have this ability to publish as an item as a line item. So you get this vertical depth where you can get multiple rows appearing. So you don't yet have that in the new user interface. Small point, because there's still quite a lot of text there to show. So let's have a look at something a bit more graphical. So I have this loss ratio analysis. In the old system, it looks a bit grey. The colors are very primary. Works in exactly the same way, changing rows. but the colors are just a bit more subtle, a bit more sophisticated. I think gold rather than yellow, less primary. But the grid, essentially does the same thing. It also looks a bit nicer with it being polyaligned. So let's have a look at the last one. Here's a series of graphs and a grid and a selector. So I can go and move through the data with my selector here, and again, the new system. The selector looks quite a lot nicer and cleaner for me. Works a that bit nicer, but more pleasant to look at, I think. Okay, so that's that comparison. Flipping back to the slides, some just further general observations while we're looking at the reports. So scaling for screen size is probably the most significant. If we go back to this chart and we alter, I might just show you the old interface. I'll alter the zoom function just to simulate having a different screen size. So if I go very small, I start to get this great distortion in the size of the graphs versus the grids. Starts to look very unsettled. However, the same thing in the new interface. Much more robust. So I think this is playing to the fact that this is going to work across different devices. Just going back to the worksheet a second. We have a little quick sum bar. So this is very reminiscent of what you see in Excel. So it counts the number of items, averages them, max and min, that kind of thing. It's all very handy. And then the last item, which is something that just came across shortly before today's event, which just wanted to mention that it was there. So conditional formatting is also available in the grids. So what's to come? Well, on my wish list, there are a few bits and pieces like the ability to save each individual page, be it a board or a worksheet, as something different. That's not there yet, which is a bit surprising. So it means you've got to recreate from scratch every time you want to do something that is essentially the same as what you did last time, apart from a small change. Perhaps include the drill to detail, which is such a good feature of the standard system. More to show how you get to further breakdown rather than to trace through the calculation functionality. Something about the comment boxes, just to put that right. I think some more charts. I think as it's getting visually stronger, having more charts would be better, including a scatter chart. And whilst the system has ability to pull in to what it calls an application, reports from different workspaces and different models, you can't do that on a single page yet, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. Now, what we do know is coming is more on the mobile functionality. Key part to show the consistency across all the devices. Now, they have been working on that. There is some configuration, it appears, needed to get them working on certain devices, and I've just been in touch with Anaplan about getting that set up, but I haven't got it ready for you today, unfortunately. I did have a go, and this is what I saw on my mobile phone. It's not quite as good as you would hope for, but as I say, I think that's a configuration issue in large part. But what is noticeable, just going back to the application again, is my laptop is a mobile device of sorts, and you can actually get quite a lot from just using your hand as opposed to the mouse and getting around. It's been set up nicely for that. So I've got a touch screen, so if I click on the back button, then I can move back. I can select a particular report. I can collapse in there. I can go and select other reports. So it all seems to be nicely set up for a much more tactile approach to navigation, which certainly looks quite exciting. So it lends itself to particularly the iPad type or the tablet device. So in conclusion, this isn't really a conclusion, but certainly for me, the interface does have a clarity about it, which is quite appealing, very, very crisp. I like the way that it fits either side, always looks nicely laid out, never looks untidy. The colors help with that too. They're much more sophisticated, looks more professional as a consequence. But then there are also other features that aren't just presentational, the way that you put it together, very easy, lots of capacity for redoing and modifying and just tweaking things and getting there very quickly. So that additional flexibility is great. I think the mobile functionality, which perhaps we will demonstrate at a later point in another webcast, will really set all that off really, really well, and I look forward to playing with that. So very solid platform, ready for further functionality. It's already got some good functionality right now, I would say. An exciting platform, really going to go from strength to strength. Just want to make sure that those further pieces of functionality, things like charts and other few refinements. So overall, professional, intuitive. I think they've got what they set out to do, and a great way to show off the complexity of a model to all users. So that's the rump of what we wanted to show you today. So thank you very much for attending today's webcast on the new Anaplan user experience, and hope to see you again. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.